Black pilot was told to wait outside by airline staff. Minutes later, she shuts the entire company down. What happened next would expose one of the biggest aviation scandals in American history. When veteran pilot Captain Nina Torres walked into Skyline Airlines headquarters that cold December morning, she had no idea that 7 words would change everything. Captain Torres, we need you to wait outside. Those words triggered a chain of events that would ground an entire airline, expose deadly safety violations, and send executives to prison. This is the true story of how one pilot's refusal to stay silent brought down a billion-dollar corporation. The morning fog clung to the tarmac of O'Hare International Airport as Nina navigated her way through the sprawling terminal complex. At 37, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from logging over 15,000 flight hours across every continent except Antarctica. Her uniform was impeccable, 4 gold stripes on each sleeve, catching the fluorescent lights as she pulled her pilot's case behind her. Nina checked her watch. 5:17 a.m. The briefing for Flight SK-4207 to San Francisco was scheduled for 5:30, giving her just enough time to grab coffee from the crew lounge before meeting her co-pilot. The familiar pre-flight ritual usually calmed her nerves, but today felt different. After months of applying, interviewing, and testing, today marked her first day as senior captain at Skyline Airlines, one of the country's most prestigious carriers. The crew lounge door swung open as Nina approached, releasing the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the low murmur of early morning conversations. Inside, pilots and flight attendants huddled around tables reviewing flight plans or scrolling through phones. Nina made her way to the coffee station, aware of the subtle shift in the room, the momentary pause in conversations, the curious glances. She'd grown accustomed to being a novelty. According to the most recent industry statistics, less than 1% of commercial airline pilots were black women. "You must be Captain Torres," a voice said from behind. Nina turned to find a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the same 4 gold stripes on his uniform. "Captain David Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Skyline." "Thank you, sir," Nina replied, shaking his hand firmly. "It's an honor to join the team." "David, please," he corrected with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll be your check captain for the next few weeks. I assume you've reviewed the flight path for today?" "Yes, sir." "David, I've memorized Skyline's SFO approach procedures and studied the weather patterns. We're expecting some turbulence over the Rockies, but nothing unusual for this time of year." David nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. The crew is waiting in briefing room C. I'll meet you there in 5. As he walked away, Nina felt a knot forming in her stomach. Throughout her career, she learned to read people quickly, a necessary skill when your life depended on clear communication with strangers in a cockpit. Something about David's demeanor set off warning bells. She'd encountered countless men like him, men who smiled while silently calculating all the ways you might fail. Nina took a deep breath and poured her coffee, adding a splash of cream. As she stirred, she caught sight of her reflection in the metallic surface of the coffee machine. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." She'd lived by those words, graduating top of her class at the Air Force Academy, serving 8 years as a military transport pilot, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, before transitioning to commercial aviation. The briefing room buzzed with activity when Nina entered. 6 flight attendants and her co-pilot, First Officer Daniel Park, were already seated around the table. Daniel, a young Asian-American pilot with just under 5 years of commercial experience, stood as she entered. "Captain Torres," he said with a genuine smile, "I've heard great things. Looking forward to flying with you." Before Nina could respond, Executive Operations Director Stephen Cross entered the room, followed by David. Stephen, a tall man with a perpetual frown etched into his face, cleared his throat. "There's been a change of plans," he announced, deliberately avoiding Nina's gaze. "Captain Mitchell will be taking command of Flight 427 today. Captain Torres, we need you to wait outside while we reassign you." The room fell silent. Nina felt all eyes on her as heat crept up her neck. "May I ask why?" she said, struggling to keep her voice even. "I was scheduled for this flight weeks ago." Stephen glanced at David before responding. "It's a matter of experience. San Francisco is a challenging approach, and given your unfamiliarity with our protocols, with all due respect, Nina interrupted, I've flown into SFO 73 times over the past decade, including during severe weather conditions. My qualifications were thoroughly reviewed during the hiring process. Captain Torres, Stephen said, his tone hardening, this isn't up for discussion. Please wait outside. For a moment, Nina considered arguing further, but decided against it. This wasn't the hill to die on, not yet anyway. With as much dignity as she could muster, she nodded, set down her flight documents, and walked out. The hallway felt colder than it had moments before. Nina leaned against the wall, her mind racing. In her 20 years of flying, she'd faced discrimination in countless forms, from passengers requesting a different pilot upon seeing her, to colleagues making snide comments about affirmative action. But this felt different, more calculated, more deliberate. 10 minutes passed before the door opened again. Instead of Stephen or David, it was Daniel who emerged, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry about that, Captain, he said, keeping his voice low. For what it's worth, I think it's complete nonsense. What did they say after I left? Nina asked. Daniel hesitated. They claimed it was standard procedure for new captains, but he trailed off, glancing down the hallway. Look, I've been here 3 years. I've seen 4 new captains start. None of them got pulled from their first flight. A familiar heaviness settled in Nina's chest. Thanks for telling me. There's more, Daniel said, leaning closer. I've been assigned as Mitchell's co-pilot, but they want you to shadow Flight 622 to Seattle. It's a short hop. They're saying it's to acclimate you to company procedures. He made air quotes with his fingers. Nina nodded slowly. And who's captaining that flight? George Anderson. The name struck like a hammer blow. George Anderson, Skyline's most senior captain and, according to industry gossip, a man who had vocally opposed diversifying the pilot ranks. Nina had never met him, but his reputation preceded him. I see, she said quietly. Captain Torres, Daniel corrected himself, if you want to file a complaint, I'll back you up. Nina considered the offer. A complaint on her first day would brand her as difficult, regardless of the merits. She'd spent her career navigating these treacherous waters, knowing when to speak up and when to bide her time. Let me handle Flight 622 first, she decided. But I appreciate the offer, Daniel. Not everyone would stick their neck out like that. He nodded, understanding the unspoken calculation. Good luck with Anderson. He can be old-fashioned. Nina almost laughed at the euphemism. I've dealt with old-fashioned before. As Daniel walked away, Nina's phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from her younger sister, Elena. Knock them dead on your first day, sis. So proud of you. Nina stared at the message, emotions warring within her. Pride in how far she'd come, anger at the situation, and determination not to let this setback define her. She typed back a quick reply. All good here. Tell you about it tonight. Then she tucked the phone away. Flight 622 to Seattle became Nina's personal purgatory. Captain George Anderson, a man in his early 60s with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl, acknowledged her presence with nothing more than a curt nod before proceeding to ignore her entirely during pre-flight preparations. The first officer, a nervous-looking man named Adam Shaw, shot her occasional apologetic glances but remained silent. Nina sat in the jump seat behind them, observing as they went through the checklist. Anderson's methodical approach to flight preparation was impressive, she had to admit. Whatever his personal failings, the man knew how to fly. But as the Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate, Anderson finally addressed her. I don't know what kind of operation you came from, Captain Torres, he said without turning around. But at Skyline, we do things by the book. No shortcuts, no improvisations. The implication was clear. He assumed she was less rigorous, less professional. I understand, Captain, Nina replied, keeping her voice neutral. Standardization is the foundation of safety. Anderson grunted in response, seemingly disappointed she hadn't taken the bait. The flight to Seattle was mercifully short, just under 2 hours. Throughout, Anderson made a point of narrating his actions in a condescending manner, as if Nina were a novice rather than a captain with thousands of hours of experience. She absorbed the humiliation silently, focusing instead on observing Skyline-specific procedures and protocols. During the descent into Seattle, however, Anderson made an error, minor but noticeable. He entered the wrong frequency for approach control. Adam either didn't catch it or was too intimidated to speak up. Nina hesitated for a split second before deciding to intervene. "Captain," she said calmly, "I believe Seattle approach is on 128.35 today, not 124.75. The cockpit went silent. Anderson's shoulders tensed visibly before he checked the approach chart. "That's correct," he said stiffly, adjusting the radio. "Thank you, Captain Torres." The acknowledgement clearly cost him, and Nina expected that would be the end of any interaction. But as they taxied to the gate after landing, Anderson surprised her. "You have a good eye," he said, still not looking at her. "Most wouldn't have caught that." "Thank you, sir." "Don't misunderstand," he continued, his voice hardening. "One good catch doesn't make you skyline material. This airline has standards, traditions. Not everyone fits." The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spelled it out. Nina felt a cold anger crystallize within her. "With respect, Captain, traditions evolve. They have to." Anderson finally turned to face her, his pale blue eyes cold. "Not at Skyline, they don't." The rest of the day passed in a blur of passive-aggressive slights and thinly veiled hostility. After returning to Chicago, Nina was informed she would be shadowing different captains for the remainder of the week. All men, all with reputations similar to Anderson's. The pattern was obvious. They were hazing her, hoping she'd quit. That evening, Nina sat in her newly rented apartment in Chicago, a glass of Cabernet in hand as she video called her sister. "They did what?" Elena's indignation filled the screen, her lawyer instincts immediately activating. "Nina, that's textbook discrimination. You could sue them into oblivion." "And then what?" Nina sighed, sinking deeper into her couch. "Be known as the black woman who sued her way into the cockpit? I'd never have the crew's trust." Elena's frustration was palpable. "So you're just going to take it? That's not the Nina I know." "I didn't say that," Nina replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "I said I'm not suing, yet. There are other ways to fight." "What's your plan?" Nina took a sip of wine, considering. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with. This feels organized, systematic. I need to know if this is isolated to a few dinosaurs or if it goes deeper." "Be careful, sis," Elena warned. "These corporate types protect their own." "I know, but I didn't come this far to be pushed out before I even get started." Later that night, unable to sleep, Nina opened her laptop and began researching Skyline Airlines more thoroughly. Founded in 1967, the company had grown from a regional carrier to a national airline with international roots. Its safety record was solid, if unexceptional. Its leadership was overwhelmingly white and male, with only 2 women on the board of directors and not a single person of color in upper management. More telling were the employee reviews on various job sites. Scanning dozens of posts, Nina noticed a pattern. Glowing reviews from white male employees contrasted with less enthusiastic ratings from women and minorities, who often mentioned Old Boys Network, an unwelcoming atmosphere, without providing specifics. Nina dug deeper, searching for any lawsuits or complaints against the airline. She found 3 discrimination suits in the past decade, all settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. 2 involved female flight attendants. 1 concerned a Hispanic ground crew supervisor. She was about to close her laptop when a news article from 8 months ago caught her eye. Skyline Airlines faces FAA scrutiny over maintenance logs. The piece was brief, mentioning only that the Federal Aviation Administration was conducting a routine review of Skyline's maintenance procedures after minor discrepancies were found in their documentation. Nina bookmarked the article, making a mental note to look into it further. It might be nothing. All airlines faced FAA reviews periodically, but something about the timing nagged at her. Skyline had recently expanded its routes to include more international destinations, putting pressure on its maintenance teams to keep planes in service. Could corners be getting cut? The next morning, Nina reported for her shadowing assignment on a flight to Denver, this time with Captain Brandon Hayes. To her surprise, Hayes turned out to be cordial, if reserved. Mid-flight, after they'd reached cruising altitude, he turned to her. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "not all of us agree with how you're being treated." Nina studied him carefully. But you're not speaking up either. Hayes had the grace to look embarrassed. It's complicated. Skyline is traditional. That word again, Nina noted, seems to cover a multitude of sins. Look, Hayes said, lowering his voice further. Watch yourself around Cross and Anderson. They've been friends for 30 years. Cross protects Anderson and his circle, no matter what. No matter what, Nina pressed. Even if they're putting safety at risk? Hayes's expression changed, a flash of unease crossing his features. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Nina replied. Is there something I should know, Captain? Hayes faced forward again, his posture stiffening. I've said too much already. Just keep your eyes open. The cryptic warning stayed with Nina throughout the day. Between flights, she made a point of visiting the maintenance hangar, introducing herself to the ground crew under the pretense of learning Skyline's procedures. Most were polite but distant. One technician, however, a middle-aged black man named Marcus Thompson, warmed up when they discovered they'd both grown up in Detroit. 23 years I've been keeping these birds in the air, Marcus told her as he inspected an engine cowling. Seen a lot of changes, not all good. How so? Nina asked casually. Marcus glanced around before answering. New management's been pushing us to speed things up. More flights, less turnaround time. Some checks that used to be mandatory are now at technicians' discretion. Nina felt a chill. Is that legal? Gray area, Marcus said with a grimace. They've got fancy lawyers who know how to word things so it sounds kosher. But between us, I wouldn't put my family on some of these planes. Before Nina could press further, a supervisor appeared, eyeing their conversation suspiciously. Marcus quickly returned to his work, and Nina thanked him before walking away, her mind racing with implications. Over the next 2 weeks, Nina endured the humiliation of being treated like a rookie despite her extensive experience. She was assigned to the least desirable routes, given minimal rest between flights, and subjected to excessive scrutiny of her performance. Yet she persisted, building a mental catalog of every slight, every deviation from protocol, every hint of something more sinister lurking beneath Skyline's polished exterior. She also began forming alliances. Daniel, who continued to express his support. Jessica Chen, a flight attendant who had faced her own battles with the company's culture. And Marcus, who gradually shared more concerning details about maintenance shortcuts. Nina was careful in these conversations, never explicitly stating her suspicions or intentions, but making it clear she valued truth and safety above all. 3 weeks into her employment, Nina was finally assigned to captain a flight, a red-eye from Chicago to Las Vegas. Typically unpopular due to the hour and the often rowdy passengers, Daniel was assigned as her first officer, which she suspected was no coincidence. If they expected her to fail, they'd want a friendly witness. The pre-flight inspection raised Nina's first serious red flag. Examining the maintenance log, she noticed discrepancies in the dates of several routine checks. When she questioned the ground crew, they assured her everything was within parameters. Not satisfied, Nina insisted on a more thorough inspection, delaying the flight by 20 minutes, a cardinal sin in the airline industry's on-time departure culture. Are you sure that's necessary, Captain? Daniel asked nervously as Nina meticulously went through the aircraft systems. Dispatch is already asking about our delay. Better 20 minutes late than not arriving at all, Nina replied, continuing her checks. Something doesn't add up in these logs. She eventually cleared the aircraft for departure, but filed a detailed report noting her concerns. The flight itself went smoothly, but upon their return to Chicago the next morning, Nina was summoned to Stephen Cross's office. Cross wasted no time on pleasantries. Captain Torres, I understand you delayed Flight 889 last night with an unnecessary inspection. Nina sat straight, meeting his gaze. The maintenance logs showed inconsistencies that warranted further examination. Our ground crew cleared that aircraft, Cross said dismissively. You overruled them based on what exactly? A feeling? Based on my 20 years of experience in FAA regulations that require complete and accurate documentation before flight, Nina countered. The intake valve inspection dates didn't align with the service records. Cross's expression darkened. Captain Torres, at Skyline we value efficiency alongside safety. Delays cost this company thousands of dollars. If you can't trust our established procedures, Perhaps this isn't the right environment for you. The threat hung in the air between them. Nina recognized the trap, either back down and ignore potential safety issues, or stand her ground and risk her position. Mr. Cross, she said carefully, are you suggesting I should overlook discrepancies in maintenance logs? I'm suggesting you should trust the expertise of our maintenance teams who have decades of experience with these aircraft. Nina nodded slowly. I see. Would you mind putting that directive in writing for my records? Cross's face flushed. That won't be necessary. Just use better judgment in the future. I always do, Nina replied, rising to leave. Safety is my primary judgment call, always. As she walked out, Nina knew she had just escalated the conflict beyond repair. Cross wouldn't forget the challenge, and neither would his allies. She was now officially a problem. That night in her apartment, Nina spread out all the notes she'd been collecting. A web of inconsistencies, warning signs, and policy violations that had become impossible to ignore. The picture they painted was disturbing. Skyline Airlines appeared to be systematically cutting corners on maintenance, pressuring employees to overlook issues, and creating a culture where raising concerns was discouraged and punished. Nina knew what she had to do, but the consequences would be severe. Her career, which she had built meticulously over decades, would likely never recover. The aviation industry was small, and whistleblowers rarely found welcome elsewhere. Still, she thought of her father, a man who had taught her that integrity wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. Flying isn't just a job, he told her when she earned her first pilot's license at 19. It's a sacred trust. People put their lives in your hands. Nina picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd saved weeks ago, but hoped never to use. Elena Torres, her sister answered, her lawyer voice in full effect. It's me, Nina said. I need your help, and I need you to connect me with that friend of yours at the FAA. There was a pause on the line. You're sure about this? Nina looked at the evidence spread before her. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Okay, Elena said simply. Tell me everything. The next morning, Nina prepared for her scheduled flight to Boston with a strange calm settling over her. She had spent hours with Elena outlining her observations, cross-referencing regulations, and preparing documentation. At 3 a.m., after Elena had finally gone to sleep on Nina's couch, Nina had sat alone in the darkness, contemplating the path ahead. Before heading to the airport, Nina made 2 crucial phone calls. The first was to Elena's contact at the FAA, arranging a meeting for the following day. The second was to a journalist at the Chicago Tribune who specialized in corporate accountability stories. Seeds planted, Nina headed to O'Hare with the weight of her decision settling firmly on her shoulders. The pre-flight briefing for the Boston route was tense. Word had already spread about her confrontation with Cross. Some crew members avoided eye contact. Others watched her with a mix of curiosity and respect. Daniel, assigned again as her first officer, gave her a subtle nod of support. As Nina reviewed the flight plan, David Mitchell entered the room unexpectedly. Captain Torres, he announced, there's been a change. I'll be taking command of this flight. Nina looked up from her paperwork. On whose authority? Executive operations, David replied, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. They feel a more experienced captain is needed for today's weather conditions. Outside, the Chicago sky was clear blue, with forecasts showing perfect flying conditions all the way to Boston. I see, Nina said, keeping her voice level. And what will my duties be? You're being reassigned to administrative tasks. Report to HR when we return. The humiliation was calculated in public, a message to everyone watching. Nina could see the discomfort on Daniel's face, the mixture of pity and fear in the flight attendants' eyes. They all knew what was happening, but none dared speak. Nina gathered her things with deliberate calmness. Very well. Good flight, everyone. As she walked out, Jessica Chen, the senior flight attendant, followed her into the hallway. This isn't right, Jessica said in a hushed voice. What they're doing to you? It's okay, Nina assured her. Some battles aren't meant to be fought in the open. Jessica hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I have photos, she said, her voice barely audible. From Flight 336 to Toronto last month. The cabin pressure valve had a crack. Visual inspection failed. They cleared it anyway, because delaying would have triggered crew rest requirements and canceled 3 more flights. Nina's heart raced. Jessica, that's serious. I know, that's why I documented it. I've been keeping records for months, but I was afraid. She trailed off, looking over her shoulder. I could lose everything. You still could, Nina warned. Are you sure? Jessica nodded firmly. What's the point of having a career if people could die because I stayed silent? Nina felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, admiration, and a renewed sense of purpose. Send everything to this email, she said, scribbling an address on a piece of paper. It's secure. And Jessica, thank you. Throughout the day, Nina moved through Skyline's headquarters with a deliberate air of compliance. She reported to HR as instructed, where she was informed she was being placed on administrative review, pending an evaluation of her compatibility with the company culture. The HR representative, a nervous young man who couldn't meet her eyes, had her surrender her ID badge for a temporary one that restricted her access to most areas. Nina accepted the restrictions without complaint, knowing that appearances now mattered more than ever. As she sat in the bland corporate HR waiting area, completing pointless paperwork designed to occupy her time, her phone vibrated with incoming messages. Daniel, this is wrong. Let me know how I can help. Marcus, need to talk. Maintenance Bay 3, 4:30. Important. The most surprising message came from Adam Shaw, the first officer who had flown with her and Anderson. Not all of us are like them. Some of us remember why we became pilots. By 4:30, Nina had finished the busy work assigned to her and made her way to the maintenance area. Her restricted badge wouldn't grant her access, but Marcus was waiting by a side entrance, looking nervous. I shouldn't be doing this, he said as he let her in, but someone needs to know what's happening. Inside the cavernous hangar, Marcus led her to a quiet corner behind a parked 737. They're falsifying records, he said without preamble. Not just fudging dates, actual structural issues are being downgraded or ignored. Nina felt her blood run cold. How widespread? At least 30% of the fleet has maintenance issues that should ground them for proper repairs. But management keeps pressuring us to sign off. When someone refuses, he trailed off. What happens? Nina pressed. They disappear, transferred, fired for unrelated reasons. Or worse. Accidents? What do you mean, accidents? Marcus lowered his voice further. Paul Rodriguez, best mechanic I ever worked with, started raising concerns about the engine mounts on the 787s last year. 3 weeks later, he fell from a maintenance platform. Broken back, career over. Company called it employee negligence. Didn't even pay his medical. Nina processed this, her suspicions crystallizing into certainty. Marcus, would you be willing to go on record about this? The fear in his eyes was answer enough. I've got 3 kids, Captain. This job is all I have. I understand, Nina said gently, but if something happens, if a plane goes down because of these practices, Marcus's expression hardened. I know. That's why I'm talking to you now. But I can't be the face of this. I just can't. You don't have to be, Nina assured him. There are other ways to get the truth out. As they parted, Marcus handed her a USB drive. Flight logs, maintenance records, internal memos. I've been collecting them for months, just in case. Be careful who sees this. That night, Nina methodically reviewed everything. Marcus's files, Jessica's photos, her own observations, and information from other sympathetic employees who had reached out throughout the day. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying. Skyline Airlines had been systematically compromising safety for profit, pressuring employees to overlook serious issues and retaliating against anyone who raised concerns. At midnight, she called Elena. We have enough, Nina said without greeting. More than enough. Send me everything, Elena replied, instantly alert despite the hour. I'll review it tonight and update the FAA contact. There's something else, Nina added. I need you to look into an accident. Paul Rodriguez, maintenance technician, workplace injury about a year ago. You think it wasn't an accident? I think nothing at Skyline happens by accident. The next morning, Nina reported for her administrative duties with the serene expression of someone who had made peace with difficult choices. Throughout the day, she noticed increased scrutiny, security guards watching her movements, IT personnel checking the computer she was using, executives walking past the glass-walled room where she sat with suspicious frequency. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. At 2 p.m., Nina was summoned to the executive conference room. Inside, she found Stephen Cross, David Mitchell, George Anderson, and two men she recognized as Skyline's legal counsel. Cross didn't invite her to sit. "Captain Torres," he began, his tone clipped, "it has come to our attention that you've been accessing restricted areas and soliciting information from employees beyond your clearance level." Nina remained silent, waiting. "Furthermore," Cross continued, "you appear to be collecting internal documents and communicating with outside entities about company matters, in direct violation of your confidentiality agreement." Still, Nina said nothing. Cross's face reddened at her calm. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" "Am I being fired, Mr. Cross?" Nina asked simply. "We're offering you the opportunity to resign," one of the lawyers interjected smoothly, "with a generous severance package, provided you sign an NDA covering all aspects of your employment with Skyline." Nina allowed herself a small smile. "And if I decline?" "Then you'll be terminated for cause," Cross snapped. "Your pilot's record will reflect insubordination, failure to follow company procedures, and creating a hostile work environment. Good luck flying for anyone after that." Nina nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their offer. Then she removed a folder from her bag and placed it on the conference table. "Before I respond," she said calmly, "you should know that at 9 a.m. this morning, my attorney submitted a comprehensive report to the Federal Aviation Administration detailing systematic safety violations at Skyline Airlines. The report includes falsified maintenance records, documented instances of planes flying with known defects, and testimony from multiple employees about pressure to overlook safety concerns." The room went deadly silent. The lawyers exchanged alarmed glances. "Additionally," Nina continued, "at noon today, the Chicago Tribune received similar documentation, along with evidence of retaliatory practices against employees who raised safety concerns. Their investigative team is particularly interested in the case of Paul Rodriguez and the suspicious circumstances of his accident." Cross's face had drained of color. "You're bluffing." "A third copy of all documentation has been placed in secure storage with instructions for release to every major news outlet and aviation authority worldwide in the event of any accidents befalling me or those who provided information." Nina met each man's eyes in turn. "So no, Mr. Cross, I will not be resigning or signing your NDA." Anderson slammed his fist on the table. "This is blackmail." "No, Captain Anderson," Nina corrected him. "This is accountability." One of the lawyers whispered urgently to Cross, who looked increasingly panicked. "What do you want?" Cross finally asked, his voice hoarse. "I want you to ground every aircraft with maintenance discrepancies immediately. I want a full safety audit conducted by an independent third party. And I want written assurance that no employee who cooperated with my investigation will face retaliation." Nina's voice was steady, unwavering. "Those are my non-negotiable terms." "That would bankrupt the company," Anderson protested. Nina raised an eyebrow. "As opposed to what happens when the FAA revokes your operating certificate? Or when families of passengers learn you knowingly flew unsafe aircraft?" The second lawyer pulled Cross aside for a hushed conversation. After several tense minutes, Cross returned to the table, defeat evident in his posture. "We'll need time to—" "You have 1 hour," Nina interrupted. "After that, I call my contacts and tell them to proceed with full public disclosure." The next few days unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. Skyline announced an emergency maintenance review, grounding nearly 40% of its fleet. Flights were canceled, passengers stranded, and the company's stock plummeted. The FARC launched a formal investigation, sending teams of inspectors to comb through Skyline's maintenance records and physical aircraft. Nina found herself at the center of a gathering storm. The Tribune's expose hit like a bombshell, followed by coverage from national networks. Former employees came forward with their own stories, creating a damning picture of a once proud airline that had sacrificed safety for profit. Cross, Mitchell, and Anderson were placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. The board of directors, desperate to salvage the company's reputation, issued public statements promising full cooperation and fundamental reforms. 6 weeks later, Nina sat in a small cafe across from Skyline's headquarters, watching as workers removed the company's iconic logo from the building facade. The airline had filed for bankruptcy protection after the FAA revoked its operating certificate, citing willful and systematic disregard for basic safety protocols. Daniel slid into the seat across from her, looking both exhausted and oddly energized. "It's official," he said. "Atlantic Airways is purchasing Skyline's assets and offering positions to all certified staff, except the executives under investigation, of course." "And you?" Nina asked. "Have they approached you?" "Senior First Officer track," Daniel confirmed with a smile. "You?" Nina sipped her coffee. "I'm still considering my options." In truth, she had received offers from 3 different airlines, all eager to demonstrate their commitment to safety and diversity by hiring the whistleblower who had brought down Skyline. She had also been approached about consulting roles with aviation safety organizations and even a book deal. "Whatever you decide," Daniel said seriously, "you change things. Not just at Skyline. The whole industry is doing internal audits now. Afraid they'll be next." Nina thought about the cost, the stress, the fear, the sleepless nights wondering if she was doing the right thing. She thought about Marcus, who had been hired as Atlantic's head of maintenance quality control, about Jessica, now training to become a safety officer, about all the employees who had risked everything to stand for what was right. Most of all, she thought about the passengers who would never know how close they had come to disaster. How many lives had been saved by people brave enough to speak up? "We all change things," she corrected Daniel gently. "All of us together." As they sat there watching Skyline's final dismantling, Nina's phone rang. It was Elena. "Have you seen the news?" her sister asked without preamble. "About the Atlantic purchase?" "Daniel just told me." "No, about Cross and the others. The Justice Department just announced criminal charges. Reckless endangerment, fraud, obstruction of justice. They're facing actual prison time." Nina closed her eyes, a complex emotion washing over her. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of completion, of justice served. "There's something else," Elena continued. "The FAA is creating a new aviation safety oversight committee. They want you on it." Nina watched as the last piece of Skyline's logo came down, leaving only the ghost of its outline on the building wall. "Tell them I'll consider it," she said. 3 months later, Captain Nina Torres guided a Boeing 787 Dreamliner into the skies above Chicago. The 4 gold stripes on her sleeve caught the morning sunlight. Atlantic Airways Flight 207 to San Francisco climbed smoothly through scattered clouds, carrying 243 passengers who had placed their trust in her hands. In the first officer's seat beside her, a young black woman named Aisha Williams monitored the instruments with focused precision. "Beautiful day for flying," Nina commented as they reached cruising altitude. "Perfect," Aisha agreed. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "Captain, I just wanted to say, what you did at Skyline, it's why I kept pursuing aviation when everyone told me to give up." Nina smiled, remembering her own journey and all the obstacles she had overcome. "The sky belongs to all of us, First Officer Williams. Never forget that." As they soared above the clouds, Nina thought about the words that had started it all. "Captain Torres, we need you to wait outside," and how they had set in motion events that transformed an industry. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important journeys begin with a door closing in your face. But the sky has no doors, only horizons waiting to be crossed. Late that evening, as Nina completed her flight log in Atlantic's Modern Operations Center, she noticed a framed quote on the wall that hadn't been there during her previous rotation. It was from her testimony before the Congressional Transportation Committee, words she had spoken when asked why she had risked everything to expose Skyline's practices. "In aviation, the truth isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. The sky forgives many things, but it never forgives lies." Nina touched the frame lightly, remembering the day she had spoken those words. How her voice had trembled slightly, but her conviction had remained unshakable. In that moment, surrounded by powerful men who had never faced the barriers she had overcome, Nina had found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Not just the courage to speak truth to power, but the wisdom to understand that some battles transcend personal interests. The aviation industry was changing, Slowly perhaps, and with resistance from those who clung to outdated traditions, but changing nonetheless. Atlantic had implemented a blind application process for new pilots, focusing on qualifications rather than names or backgrounds. They had revamped their reporting systems to protect whistleblowers and established an independent safety council with actual authority to ground aircraft without fear of retaliation. And across the industry, other airlines were following suit, recognizing that diversity wasn't just a buzzword, but a safety asset. Different perspectives, spotting different potential problems, creating a more robust system. Nina's phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "Dinner tomorrow? Big news to share." Nina smiled, typing back, "Your place. I'll bring wine." As she gathered her things to leave, Nina paused to watch through the window as ground crews prepared aircraft for the next day's flights. Technicians moved with purpose, inspecting, checking, verifying, no corners cut, no details overlooked. In the distance, a plane took off, its lights disappearing into the night sky. Nina had always loved that sight, the miracle of human ingenuity lifting thousands of pounds of metal into the air, defying gravity through scientific precision and human determination. But now it carried new meaning. Each departing plane represented not just technological achievement, but moral victory, the triumph of integrity over expediency, of courage over complicity. "Captain Torres!" Nina turned to find Atlantic's chief pilot, Sarah Chen, approaching with a smile. "I've been looking for you," Sarah said. "The Academy of Aviation Safety wants you to speak at their annual conference. Something about changing corporate culture from within." Nina laughed softly. "Not sure I'm the best example of working within the system. Sometimes breaking the system is exactly what's needed to rebuild it properly," Sarah replied. "Will you consider it?" Nina looked back at the night sky, at the distant plane now just a moving star among real ones. "Yes," she said, "I think I will." In the months and years that followed, Nina became known not just for her skill in the cockpit, but for her unwavering advocacy for safety and equality in aviation. She mentored young pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, testified in support of stronger whistleblower protections, and eventually joined Atlantic's executive leadership team, the first Black woman to serve as vice president of operational safety at a major airline. The industry magazine that had once ignored her achievements now featured her on its cover with the headline, "The Pilot Who Changed Aviation." Inside, the article detailed how one woman's stand against discrimination had uncovered a web of dangerous practices and ultimately transformed an industry's approach to both diversity and safety. Nina kept the magazine, not out of vanity, but as a reminder for the days when progress seemed too slow, when old attitudes resurfaced in new guises, when the temptation to accept good enough threatened to override the demand for excellence. On those days, she would remember standing in that hallway outside the briefing room, told to wait while others decided her fate. She never waited again, and she taught others not to wait either, not for permission to speak truth, not for recognition of their worth, not for a place at tables where decisions affecting lives were made. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to wait outside. On the 5th anniversary of Skyline's collapse, Nina received an unexpected email. The sender's name made her pause. David Mitchell. "Captain Torres, you may be surprised to hear from me. After much reflection during my community service sentence, I've come to recognize the harm caused by my actions and attitudes. While nothing can undo the past, I wanted you to know that your courage forced me to confront truths I had spent a lifetime avoiding. The aviation world is better because you refused to be silenced. For whatever it's worth after all this time, I am sorry. Respectfully, David Mitchell." Nina sat with the message for a long while, emotions complicated and contradictory. Not just for the apology itself, which felt simultaneously too little and remarkably significant, but for what it represented, the possibility of genuine change, even in those who had seemed most resistant to it. She thought of her father, who had passed away 2 years earlier, and how proud he had been to see her vindicated. She thought of Aisha Williams, now a captain herself, mentoring the next generation. She thought of all the planes landing safely every day because people had found the courage to prioritize lives over profits. Finally, Nina typed a simple reply. Apology accepted, Captain Mitchell. The sky belongs to all of us. As she pressed send, Nina felt something settle within her. Not an ending, but a continuation. The story of Skyline Airlines and its downfall had become part of aviation history, a case study in ethics courses and safety manuals. But Nina's own story continued to unfold, page by page, flight by flight, truth by truth. The airline industry, like society itself, remained imperfect, still struggling with biases both obvious and subtle, still balancing competing priorities of profit and safety, still needing voices brave enough to speak unwelcome truths. But change had taken root, growing steadily through cracks in old systems.